Hey there, this is Nate English with Gregory Kennedy. You might have seen us in our daily Volta podcast that we were doing, and Gregory and I are going to be working on a training series this winter. And so for those of you who don't already follow this channel and know who I am, I'm a retired professional cyclist who raced on the road for several years and did a bunch of cool races like the Tour of California and stuff like that, and reached a fairly high level, but also did it while I was working full time. And now my main activity is coaching. And so I love riding, I love training, and I love helping other people to get more out of their experience as an athlete. And so this is a series that's going to be about that. So Gregory, tell us what we're doing.
Yeah, no, so I'm excited to be hosting our Ask Coach Nate series. It was something I suggested because I have lots of questions and have worked with Nate for many years as a coach, both in cycling and in running. And so the first episode, I wanted to cover winter cycling training myths and hopefully have Nate either confirm or debunk some of the more popular myths that are out there, right? So as I've been riding a lot with old-time racers and stuff, I've heard all kinds of wild things that people either recommend you do or don't do in the off season. The most popular one, of course, being something like base training, where in the old days, if you look up any of the research from cycling back in Europe, they just kind of rode a lot of miles really slow. Like I've even heard crazy things about only using the little ring in the front. So Nate, anything you want to say before we jump into these questions about today's topic?
Mostly I just really look forward to these discussions. And I feel like I still remember when I first got into running and just being pretty lousy at it, and the years and years of training that I had. So I feel like I reached a very high level of the sport and have a lot of experience throughout the range of what different athletes' experiences are like. So I really like the opportunity to take my experience and try to translate it into something that's useful for people at whatever level they're at. So I don't know, I'm just looking forward to it.
Well, okay, when it comes to base training, is this something that you believe in? I mean, for me, do the pros even really do this anymore? Was it something that you did when you were riding professionally? Did you guys really just ride around all winter really slow?
So, I mean, I think it really depends on what you mean by base training. I think that there's a tradition or a common conception that base training should just be really high mileage and really low intensity training for months on end. Maybe people take a break in October and then they start picking up in November, and then they just do a ton of miles between November and let's say March before the racing picks up, and they just do a lot of low intensity stuff, and then progressively starting in the spring they do higher and higher intensity training as they get ready for racing. And in principle, a lot of people do the bulk of their miles at a relatively low intensity, but it's what is relatively low intensity for a short period of time becomes quite challenging if you're training 30 hours a week. So if you're Chris Froome and you're riding around at 250 watts, but you're doing it for 30 hours a week, that's actually really hard training. It's just not really intense training. And it's not like he's doing only 250 watts all winter long. He's doing 80, 90% that kind of 250, 300 watt training where it's pretty comfortable for him at any given moment. But over time, it builds up to a lot of aerobic stress and a lot of endurance stress. But anyone generally after the first 4, 6, 8 weeks is starting to add a little bit of intensity, or they might even include a little bit all of the time, but it's just not the bulk of their training. And I think that especially if you're not able to train huge volumes, you can't train 15, 20, 25 hours a week like pros do. If you're working and you have kids and you're riding the trainer for 40 minutes on the weekdays and you're going out a little bit longer on the weekend, but you can't go more than 3 hours, you really aren't going to benefit in the same way, because you quickly exhaust your capacity for low intensity training. Because after 4 to 6 weeks, if you're training 8 hours a week and you're just riding at a comfortable endurance pace, over the next 3-4 months, you could eke out very, very, very slight gains in your aerobic conditioning from doing that. But you pretty quickly max out your capacity to benefit from 6 or 7 or 8 hours of low intensity training. And it's really going to be helpful to mix in something more than that. And it doesn't necessarily have to be all out hard VO2 max intervals or anything like that, but it is good to mix it up. So usually with my clients, since most people aren't in that boat where they're training 20 to 30 hours a week, most of them are, working, or even some of the high level athletes that I work with that are trying to go out and win national championships. Like, they're often not at a point in their development where they're trying to race a week-long stage race where they need huge volume, and they're doing more intense racing. So usually I will stay away from using the terminology of base training because it has a lot of connotations in people's minds. I'll often talk about foundational training, and usually I'll conceptualize that as like three main things that you want to work on throughout the winter, which you can never really have too much of these three things, but you can see an opportunity cost where if you focus on one more than the others, like, you will lose out on some of that, the gains that you could get in the other categories. So usually I think about like endurance, aerobic conditioning, and strength, or like strength and power. So basically like endurance, like, yeah, like how long can you go at a pretty steady pace? Aerobic conditioning being like sub-threshold aerobic conditioning, so you can comfortably push the pace, but you're not doing anaerobic work. So if your threshold is 300 watts, like, your endurance training might be 150 to 200 watts most of the time, and you do, a 4-hour ride that's, an average power of like 160 or 170, but you might be doing some like tempo efforts on some climbs that are like 250 to 280 watts, let's say. So it's like you're pushing, but it's still pretty comfortable, and you don't have that like anaerobic burn in your legs. And then strength, like, we just can never have too much neurological recruitment of our muscles. And so that could be done on the bike with like big gear work and climbing efforts where you're under constant muscle tension. And then off the bike as well, like strength training off the bike, if you have access to that and you enjoy it, can be one of the most useful ways that you spend your time.
So you don't prescribe to the December champion syndrome, right? Like people who that's the word for people that go too hard in the winter. Like what I got from that was like, hey, unless you're Chris Froome, which I am definitely not, doing some intensity into winter is valuable. Is there a limit to how much intensity, like, perhaps you would want to get in the winter? Do you want to reduce that amount?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely want to stay away from doing frequent, very hard, intense workouts. So, like, on occasion, doing a hard group ride where maybe people go out and they are like the December racers. If you wanted to do that a couple times a month, that's going to be fine. It's not going to like ruin your whole winter to go out and spend 2 or 3 days a month going really intensely hard just for the fun of it, because that like enjoyment and consistency in training is like really key. So if that's really fun for you and that motivates you to like go out and do the fast group ride, go ahead and do that. But just keep in mind that it's December or January, and like you're trying to race or set a PR on a climb or do whatever your fitness goals are in like April or June. So if you are doing like every week, 2 or 3 times a week, very intense workouts, that's great if you're trying to reach a peak sometime in the next like 1 to 2 months, but it's not great if you're shooting for a peak that is higher and months down the line. So you want to include some intensity, but I would think about most of the time, if you were going to think about like intensity and overall training difficulty, most of your rides, you don't want them to be like a 5 on like a scale of 1 to 5, and you don't want them to be a 1 or a 2. During the winter, you want to have a lot of rides that are like level like 3 or 4, where it's like it's training, you're kind of pushing. Sometimes you end up finishing like your long ride and you're very tired, but you're never destroyed, and you're also not like totally fresh, because you don't need to be totally fresh to do moderate intensity rides to build up your strength and your endurance. But you also don't want to go out and just like roast yourself 3 times a week. That's great if you're shooting for a month out, you want to be in peak shape, but nobody wants to be in peak shape on January 12th.
And so you kind of covered this cross training. I'm really curious to understand. In fact, like, there were rumors years ago that Sky, you mentioned Chris Froome, had some secret cross training that I don't think was ever revealed. The rumors I heard was that they did like rowing in the winter. They hired a former rowing coach, but actually I don't know if I ever had that information released publicly. So I was curious, like, what do you think about cross training? And it's a popular thing for people to do in the winter. It's something that you recommend, or how do you feel about cross training?
So I think it can be extremely valuable and useful, especially strength work, if that's an area where people have room to grow. Like going to the gym, lifting weights can be incredible. I would say for like 90% of athletes, that could be one of the best like hours of their time if they were going to add something to their training, or if they're training 10 hours a week, like 9 hours of cycling and 1 hour of strength work at the gym could be worthwhile. Um, Definitely doing aerobic conditioning in other sports can be good, especially if they're using your legs. Like rowing should, like if you have good rowing form, you should be using your legs a lot and your back, and that's great for cycling. And like the energy demands of both are actually really similar. Or running can be amazing. And it's great because those activities use the same muscles as cycling, but they use them differently. So it can be nice for the longevity of an athlete to include some cross training somewhat regularly so that they are staying fit, but they're not only doing one thing all the time and never strengthening other things. So that's when you end up with like muscle imbalances, and sometimes you increase your risk of injury in the long run if you only ride and you never do anything else, or if you only run and you never do anything else. So like I would say I would recommend cross training for almost any athlete, but I would definitely recommend doing something that you enjoy doing, so it's not a chore and that you're not making your training unnecessarily difficult psychologically. So if you're just like totally committed to doing the best training that you can because you want the best results that you can, I would say, yeah, like maybe do a little bit of running in the winter, definitely go to the gym. If you hate both of those things, maybe you like kayaking or rowing or something else, and um, it's all about like what's going to work well for you. But in general, yeah, it's totally worth doing. Rowing is great, running is great, and running is also really good for your bones as well. Like cycling is notoriously not stressful on your skeletal system and can, over the long term, lead to like decline in bone mass, which doesn't usually cause issues until later in life. But I don't know, most of us are going to, probably be healthy and living long enough that that could be an issue in the long run.
Yeah, that's funny. Like I like cross training, but I enjoy it. So for me, it's great. There were years where I did over 10,000 miles, and I didn't actually feel as good. I think I was maybe better at cycling, or I just did it a lot, and so it just had a lot of fitness. But it didn't necessarily make me feel as balanced and as strong. And now when I do a lot of cross training, I like to run. I like to go to the gym. I generally feel better, and I'm never going to be riding a grand tour anyway, so like feeling good and like being in shape and having just overall fitness be relatively high, I think has been great for me. And I'm unusual. A lot of people who don't like going to the gym, so for those people who like to ride 10,000 miles a year, like I think for me, I always tell them like do it if that's what you like. If you like doing, it's better than not getting any exercise.
Yeah, totally. And I think that like what you said is very common. Like a lot of times, if I do more cross training and more running for a couple of years, or I like go heavy on it in the winter and then I'm riding, and maybe I'm only riding in the spring or summer months, like I feel great because I'm doing the sport, like I'm doing sport specific activities. So I feel really good on the bike for a while. But if I do that indefinitely and go for like a year or so with like minimal other training, it starts to you start to feel like imbalanced. You start to feel like not as strong and just not as good, like you say, just like as a human. And it catches up with you. And that's one reason why, like, most serious athletes that are professionals and are trying to get the best fitness for their chosen event or sport, like whether it's mountain biking or track cycling or stage racing or one days, like most of them will do some strength training during the winter, and definitely plenty of core work. And a lot of them will do other sports like running or rowing or snowshoeing. But for those of us that are like don't have to and we're just doing it for the fun of it, like I think the fun and the feeling that you get out of the training that you do is like pretty key.
Yeah, I like riding the bike, and I switched to doing more running because it was just easier to do when I travel, and it just takes up less time, right? Like riding the bike a lot. Like to get 10,000 miles a year, you have to ride a lot, and if you have a full time job, like to fit all that in, it doesn't really leave a lot of time to go to the gym or cook dinner, right? Like you're
Yeah.
just like out there riding
Yeah.
all the time.
And
So
that's
right, yeah, I think there's value to it.
and that's another thing too with people that are trying to be efficient with their training. Like if you can ride 30 hours a week because you're on Sky and you're getting paid to do it, that's great. um, for them, strength training is going to be performance enhancing and reduce their chances of injury. But if you're training 10 hours a week and you're trying to get the best results out of it, whether you just want to like feel healthy and fit, or you're trying to like race and you want to have good fitness on the bike, like maximizing your time in training might be best done by riding 8 hours running an hour and going to the gym an hour. Because like if you ride 4 or 5 times a week and then once or twice a week you like go for a half-hour run and then go to the gym for half an hour, or you have some weights at home, like that half hour of strength training, like that hour of those two activities might be a better investment of your time than another hour of riding.
So I got a two-part question to kind of wrap things up here. Is like, so in the winter, I guess you've ultimately said like, hey, base training, like, don't necessarily ride around slow all year, all winter long. But if you're an amateur racer, what do you think they should focus on? And then of course, like if you're not an amateur racer and just trying to like get faster and stronger in the winter, like how do you recommend they perhaps handle winter training? So let's start with like people that are amateur
Yeah.
racers. We know a lot of people here in Northern California that like to race. What do you recommend they do?
Yeah. So I think it it all I think anytime you're trying to answer a question about like how should I be training, I would think about the context of like where somebody's at and where they want to be. So like where are you at right now in your fitness and what's your history like? And what are you trying to do in 2 months or 6 months or 10 months from now? So like I'm working with some athletes that have been riding a lot and they like took it a little bit easy, but they're getting ready for like Leadville next year or something like that. And their horizon is like a ways off. Some people who race the road circuit like this year with COVID, we'll see what the deal is with racing. But racing might start in February in California, and then it runs for the next like 7, 8 months. So in November or December, like they're only a few months away from early season races. But if you were like starting off of a total break, like you took a break from training because it's October and you're just like taking a full rest, versus if you're still active and maybe you're cross training and maybe you're riding a lot, obviously your fitness right now will be very different, training versus not training. But generally I would think about focusing on, yeah, mostly racking up miles until you kind of exhaust whatever you can fit into your schedule and whatever you're going to enjoy. So if you can train 10 hours a week, try to get in a lot of miles, get in a lot of like tempo and like low threshold efforts a couple times a week. So you get some extended periods of elevated heart rate, elevated breathing, but you're still mostly comfortable. Like you're pushing, but it's comfortable. And doing some stuff that's like more neuromuscular. So that could be sprints that are intense enough to like require you to contract your muscles hard to build power, but not so long that you really feel like you're hitting your limit. So like there's a huge difference if you are sprinting on the bike between 10 seconds and 15 or 20 seconds. And if you have a power meter, like that your peak power curve is like kind of flat and then it just drops off precipitously. So if let's say your peak power is like 1,000 watts, you can probably do that for a few seconds and it's easy because you just have ATP that you just stomp on the pedals and you can do 1,000 watts. But doing 1,000 watts for 10 seconds is like extremely difficult for you. And doing it for 20 seconds is just impossible. So like for that person doing, 700-800 watt sprints for 10 or 12 seconds, that's going to be good neuromuscular training, but it's not going to create so much anaerobic load that it's going to take away from your ability to do good aerobic conditioning. So I would just think about doing 2 or 3 rides that are like moderately challenging, focused on, tempo, big gear work, and maybe once a week doing a few sprints just to have like good neurological recruitment. Or if you're doing strength work off the bike, that could substitute or complement that. And think about going like 80% hard most of the time. Like just overall in the big picture, like your week as a whole it should feel like training, but you shouldn't feel wrecked at the end of each week. But you also shouldn't like finish your weekend and be like, oh, like I'm like not even tired.
Yeah, I think that's a mistake most people make is they're just not consistent. Anyone that asks me about like what I do with training, I generally tell them like just try to do it more frequently and then reduce the intensity. So I think the inclination is like, oh, I didn't run all week and ate a bunch of Halloween candy or cake or whatever it is, so I'm just going to go and crush it on Saturday and destroy myself. Then they're all injured and not feeling good, and the recovery takes a long time for them. So I think people would, at least everyone I know, would benefit from just like trying to exercise a more consistent basis. Like with my wife, she saw the training I was doing with you, and she's like, "Can you put together a training plan for my Peloton?" And so I did. And she has like an endurance day and a high
Nice.
intensity day. And so there's days where she's really busy, and I'm like, just go do 30 minutes, right? And I think that that's been the biggest thing for her, is just being um, consistent and doing it like not in a random manner.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that for a lot of people, that's one of their biggest opportunities is just to be slightly more consistent with like not not being as variable with like training 2 days one week, 5 days another week, 3 days the next week, and then 4 days. It's like if you can just do 4 days every week, and then sometimes maybe you get a fifth day or whatever it is that you're capable of doing, even if it's just half an hour on the trainer or you go jogging for half an hour. Even if you would want to go out for an hour or two, ride outside, but you just don't have time for it. Um, Getting a non-zero like training stress on a lot of those days where you could have zero training stress is going to make such a huge difference in the long run. And if you just imagine like over the course of a year, if you have 20 days like where you do half an hour on the trainer or half an hour run instead of just nothing, like at the end of the year, like you're a lot fitter. And it's just a huge payoff to be consistent. And I think that there's also, I don't know, I think we overestimate our ability to like have agency and make choices and be rational human beings. I think so much of what we do is just habit and routine. And if you can keep your routine, even if it's minimal on some days because you're busy, like if you want to train Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, just whatever it is, like keep that routine going. And when you can do more, but just doing something is better than nothing.
Yeah, yeah. For me, the biggest increase in fitness I ever got was when I decided that I would just ride my bike to work every day. And that's the year that I did the 10,000 miles. And I didn't ride very hard, but I just rode every day. And like, I couldn't believe like how strong I got by doing that. Like, that was like a real eye opener to me. And like, how I ride now is pretty different. And I focus on a lot more intensity with you. But when I was just kind of riding around as an amateur, like the kind of person who's like, I don't really want to race. I just want to have a good time. I want to be fit. Like that for me was just huge, where I started just racking up a lot of miles, and they weren't very difficult. Like I rode to work. It took anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour. And I just was like feeling really strong and really fit, and it was really impressive. And so I've seen the advantages of like consistency over the like crush it on Saturday and then kind of like maybe do something during the week, but have a lot of days where you're not really doing anything very physical or very athletic, right? And that definitely had real limits, and I think even created a lot of opportunities for just injury and stress, because the inclination is on Saturday to go out and challenge yourself and just go beyond like what's probably healthy.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially like looking back at that point in your development as an athlete, like at some, when you're earlier on in your development, sometimes just riding 3 or 4 days a week or every weekday or whatever it is going to be great and help you to progress. And as you get fitter and as you have more of a history and your body has like gone through more years of training, like the baseline of what you can do easily and the amount of effort that you can put into training and like benefit from it slowly goes upwards, because your body has a lot of long-term changes that like your circulatory system adapts, your nervous system adapts. And so even though you and I might have fundamentally the same like genetic makeup as we did 5 years ago or 20 years ago or when we were born, like the the physical structure of our body has slowly been evolving as we've done thousands of miles over the years. So sometimes when, again, like specificity to the athlete, like if you are starting where you had a few months off, or you just got a bike this year and you're like haven't ever been training, just riding consistently 3, 4, 5 days a week is maybe going to be like your first step in getting fitter. But then as you establish that baseline, like what I would consider good foundational training this winter is different than what I would consider good foundational training like 10 years ago when I was first getting into bike racing and maybe I had like a season under my belt. I still remember like the first year that I was racing, I thought to myself, like going into it, it's like, oh, I feel like 10 or 12 hours is like pretty easy, but 15 hours would be like challenging and like a good benchmark. But I knew that if I tried to train 20 hours a week at that point, like I thought I would burn out and that would be too much. And it was great. Like I trained very effectively, averaging 14 to 16 hours most weeks. And it was great. But after that, I knew that I had like one more year under my belt. I had a lot of racing under my belt. And the second year that I was like really focused on racing, I thought, oh, like something more like 18 to 20 hours is going to be very doable. And it's also going to be something that my body can adapt to and benefit from. Whereas if I did 20 hours of training that first year that I was racing, it wouldn't have benefited me the same way. It probably would have just burnt me out, you know? So as far as like winter training, like your question earlier, like if you are a newer athlete, just training consistently and racking up miles and pushing a little bit once or twice a week might be fine. But if you're like a multi-year athlete and you've been a bike racer for years, you'll probably very quickly get the endurance that you can get out of training whatever your schedule is. So then that's when you start to do like more and more tempo efforts, more and more big gear efforts, and you might have like more focused training involved in your winter program than earlier on in your career.
Yeah. So I guess to wrap it up, you do not need to ride in the little ring all winter like they
Well, you
did.
could. You just wouldn't be very fast.
Like they did in the old days. I even heard that at really old Berkeley Bike Club meetings. They even employed this methodology. So it's nice to know that like, no, you don't have to get tons of base miles in unless that's what you want to do. Some intensity is great, but you don't need to go to the full level of intensity, particularly if you're trying to ramp up for race season. And then of course, like, get out there and enjoy yourself and cross train, right? If you like that sort of thing. Anything else you'd want to let people know about winter training?
I mean, I think that a lot of times people focus just on their training and they don't focus as much on other things that they might be doing that can impact their sense of well-being generally and their success as an athlete. So things like when and how you sleep, what your diet is like, when you time your food and stuff like that. And so I'm sure we can go into that more in the future, but be consistent with your training and just don't think one-dimensionally about it, and think about like getting good sleep, getting good food, and establishing habits over the winter when you're not racing and you're not like worried about the race that's happening this weekend. Just think about like every week as a way that you can practice all of the things that will help you become a good athlete in the long run. And then when you are racing in June, you don't have to think about all those things because they're just habits, and you just, you sleep well, you eat well, you know how you want to warm up for a good workout. So you also know how you want to warm up for a race. It's all the same, but you can experiment and like have a good kind of holistic effort as an athlete during the winter that you establish in a way that is easier because there's no stress. Like if you have a bad ride on Saturday, who cares? It's just a training ride. Whereas if you have a race on Saturday in May or June, like you probably feel bad if you screw it up.
Excellent. Yeah, I know the best advice is always the simplest, but the hardest to do, right? Sleep well, train well, eat well, right? But life seems to always get in the way.
Yeah.
So, hey, if you like this content, like this video, subscribe to the channel. We plan to do more of these videos going forward. So you can send us your training questions, post them on social media. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on all the cool stuff. I haven't figured out TikTok yet, but I plan to get there at some point. And of course, just leave a comment here and we'll incorporate your feedback in the future. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks. Bye.